If they buy their oil from Venezuela, they have to pay a 25% tariff to do business with the United States.
On top of existing tariffs, so for example, China.
Yes.
298.5%. That's not growth, that's punishment. The penalty Canada imposes on imported American butter once it crosses a certain threshold. Cheese, 245.5%. These aren't hypothetical numbers. They're the sharp edge of a trade policy that's quietly gutting the U.S. dairy industry. Underneath the diplomatic smiles between two of the largest North American economies, a silent economic war is already underway, and it's about to get much louder. The core weapon is the tariff rate quota, TRQ, a deceptively polite system that Canada uses to limit how much foreign dairy it allows in under favorable terms. Within quota, low tariffs. Outside the quota, financial annihilation. For American companies sending cheese or butter north of the border, crossing that line means turning a shipment into dead weight. The logic behind the system is simple: protect Canadian farmers, regulate supply, and stabilize prices. But the actual battlefield lies in who gets access to the quota. It's not a free market, it's a gatekeeper system, and increasingly, American exporters are finding themselves locked out. Under USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement that replaced NAFTA, Washington expected a more open and fair allocation of import quotas. That didn't happen. Instead, retail chains inside Canada, Loblaws, Metro, Sobeys, received the lion's share of quotas, freezing out U.S. companies with existing demand, infrastructure, and contracts. The U.S. Trade Representative calls this what it is: protectionism wearing a legal disguise. The impact is brutal. Hundreds of tons of U.S. mozzarella, cheddar, and powdered milk are stuck at the border or collecting dust in cold storage across Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Idaho. With no quota in sight, exporters are left with two bleak choices: freeze the inventory or dump it below market prices at home. Some shipments are being liquidated at 30–40% below cost just to cover basic expenses. The downstream damage is accelerating. Oversupply is dragging down raw milk prices. Farmers, already struggling, are the first casualties. Nearly half of mid-sized farms surveyed by the U.S. Dairy Farmers Association reported losses in the first half of 2025. One Pennsylvania farm with 400 head of cattle and a history of stable output has seen its revenue collapse by nearly 30%. And this isn't just a farm problem, this is a national supply chain crisis, a quiet one but no less destructive. According to a June 2025 report from the U.S. Dairy Export Council, the damage from the Canada TRQ debacle has exceeded $7 billion. That includes $1.20, $2 billion in canceled export contracts, $800 million in emergency storage, freezing, and logistics, $1 billion in devalued dairy products sold for cents on the dollar. Then there are indirect losses, depressed domestic prices, factory job cuts, transportation delays, and downstream effects across grocery and food service chains. Add it up, and you get a collapse. Quiet, but systemic. Meanwhile, Canada insists it's operating within the bounds of USMCA. No rules broken, no agreements breached. Technically, legally, but not ethically. And trust, once fractured, doesn't recover overnight. This isn't just a trade imbalance, it's a strategic fracture. A rupture in the very foundation of what was once thought to be an open, rules-based market between allies. Washington has options: file a case at the WTO, renegotiate USMCA provisions, or retaliate with tariffs of its own. But time, political will, and unity are in short supply. It's an election year. Every move is under scrutiny. Every delay lets the damage spread deeper. In May 2025, the U.S. announced an $850 million emergency support package for the dairy sector. But that figure barely scratches the surface, less than 12% of the total losses. And if the crisis drags into 2026, bankruptcies, layoffs, market exits, the collapse of U.S. export share in one of its closest, most lucrative markets, not because of demand failure but because of quota exclusion. The broader implications are chilling. If the U.S. can't enforce fair trade terms in dairy, what happens in beef, wheat, aluminum, lithium? Quotas on paper aren't evil. But when they become tools of disguised protectionism, they undermine the system they're meant to regulate. Canada has every right to protect its farmers, but not by gaming trade access and crippling foreign competitors. And the U.S.? If it continues clinging to free market ideals without building enforcement and negotiation muscle, it invites defeat. Not just in dairy, but across industries. Strategic recovery won't come from aid packages alone. The U.S. must. apply pressure through diplomatic channels, force Canada to honor transparent allocation under USMCA, expand dairy exports to Southeast Asia, Japan, and the Middle East, weaponize legal and financial levers when trust breaks down. If not, this $7 billion crisis will be more than a cautionary tale. It'll be the case study in how a passive superpower lost control of its trade future. Steel tariffs and energy, the new cold trade war of North America. On July 11, 2025, President Trump announced a 35% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum, effective August 1st. His justification: economic security, trade rebalancing, and protecting American jobs. But what followed was a chain reaction that detonated decades of industrial interdependence between the US and Canada. For years, 90% of steel consumed in the US came from Canada, while Canada relied on the US for about 20% of its own supply. It was a two-way artery of mutual benefit. That artery has now been severed. Within 48 hours of Trump's decision, Ottawa launched a retaliatory $22 billion counterstrike. But this wasn't a tantrum. It was a calculated, multi-tiered strategy designed to turn America's aggression into a long-term Canadian advantage. Step 1. A blunt force 50% tariff on US steel and auto components. Key targets included pickup truck frames, EV motors, and industrial metals, items that hit Detroit where it hurts. Step 2. Canada activated the Green Steel Fund, pumping $4.8 billion CAD into modernizing its steel industry. Companies like Dofasco and Algoma are now transitioning to electric arc furnaces powered by clean hydrogen and hydroelectricity, slashing carbon emissions by 60% and reducing dependency on coke-based furnaces. Step 3. Ottawa passed federal procurement laws requiring all national infrastructure to use domestically produced steel and aluminum, a direct move to eliminate US imports and reroute demand toward Canadian mills. The impact was immediate and visceral. Aluminum prices surged to over $3 500 ton in Chicago, highest since 2022. Cold-rolled steel jumped by $60/ton, hammering auto manufacturers. The Midwest premium for aluminum rose by 54%, pushing input costs into dangerous territory. The math is brutal. A Ford F-150 could now cost $8,000 more per unit, 10 times the Canadian estimate. US automakers can't pass that on to consumers without wrecking sales. Instead, they're absorbing 70% of the increase. Margins are collapsing. Anderson Economic Group estimates $30 billion/year in additional costs for US consumers, just from steel and aluminum tariffs. Pickup trucks, the pride of Middle America, are becoming unaffordable. Ford alone says new labor contracts already added $850 per vehicle. The tariffs? They're the knockout punch. In Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio, auto factories are delaying expansions, freezing hiring, and bracing for layoffs. The fallout is economic, but also political. These are battleground states in an election year. Every price hike is a vote lost. Every factory slowdown is a headline. But while US industry bleeds, Canada is restructuring. Backed by Ottawa's investment, steel plants in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie are running at full capacity, pivoting towards supplying clean tech and wind power projects. In British Columbia, a massive wind farm cluster is being built with 60% domestically sourced materials. Canada is filling its own demand vacuum with local production and keeping workers employed. Even in the face of layoffs triggered by the initial US tariff shock, 200 Canadian steel jobs cut in 2025, Ottawa didn't flinch. It doubled down. It shifted strategy from retaliation to transformation. This isn't a tit-for-tat trade war anymore. It's a cold industrial decoupling, and it's spreading. On June 30th, 2025, Canada exported LNG to South Korea by sea for the first time in history. It's more than a milestone. It's a declaration. Canada no longer needs American pipelines. For over 30 years, 100% of Canadian natural gas flowed through the US, priced and taxed below market value. That era is over. Now, with direct shipping routes across the Pacific, Canada cuts transportation time in half, avoids US tariffs, and sells at premium prices. EcoGas, Canada's benchmark, trades at $1.10 MMBtu, nearly a third the price of US Henry Hub. It's not just profitable, it's geopolitically liberating. Backed by the $40 billion CAD LNG Canada project, with equity stakes from Shell, Petronas, Mitsubishi, and Sinopec, this move puts Canada inside the Indo-Pacific energy race. It's now a supplier to Japan, South Korea, and soon possibly India. It's also outside US control. The benefits are cascading. a $5.8 billion CAD contract with indigenous communities ensuring equity participation and long-term revenue sharing, over 23 billion CAD in projected government revenue, even with tax breaks and carbon costs. Job creation across British Columbia, particularly in Kitimat, now reborn as a global LNG hub. Washington is watching and worrying, not just because it's losing control of North American gas flows, but because this entire strategy is a rebuttal to Trump's tariffs. Ottawa is saying, if you weaponize trade, we'll diversify away from you, permanently. Meanwhile, Trump isn't finished. On July 8, 2025, he announced a 200% tariff on imported pharmaceuticals effective August 1st. The goal: force pharmaceutical production back into the U.S., but the fallout? Catastrophic. 80–90% of all active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, used in U.S. drugs come from China and India. If the tariffs hit, prices will explode, 6 to 8 times higher for some medications, cancer drugs, insulin, biologics, essentials for elderly Americans. The American Hospital Association has already issued warnings. Treatment costs could jump 20–40% in Q4 alone. Australia, one of the U.S. top 5 pharma suppliers, is pushing back. Canada is seeking a quiet waiver but has activated emergency reserves for over 200 essential drugs, along with a $1.22 billion CAD support package for domestic pharma firms. This isn't just trade leverage, this is systemic disruption. Supply chains once considered sacred, steel, food, fuel, and medicine, are now battlegrounds. What started as protectionism has become a full-scale realignment of the North American economy. Tariffs are no longer bargaining chips. They're blunt instruments reshaping alliances, destroying sectors, and forcing governments to choose between retaliation or reinvention. The question now is not when will this end, but who will survive it? And more importantly, what kind of economic order will emerge after the dust settles?